The man at the front desk looked at Rupert Caldwell, the way people look at something they've already decided doesn't belong. Not a long look. Just a flicker, eyes moving from the worn corduroy jacket to the scuffed dress shoes to the small rolling suitcase with the broken zipper pull. 1 second, maybe 2. Then the smile came, the practiced kind that hotels train their staff to deliver, the kind that says welcome without meaning it. "Can I help you?" the young man said. Rupert didn't answer right away. He was 71 years old, and he had learned, the hard way, over decades, that silence sometimes does more work than words. He set his suitcase beside the marble counter and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. His hands moved slowly. They always moved slowly now, ever since the arthritis had settled into his knuckles, like an uninvited houseguest that never left. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, set it on the counter, and smoothed it flat. "Reservation," he said. "Caldwell, 2 nights." The desk clerk, his name tag said Brannon, glanced at the paper without touching it. Then he typed something into his computer. His expressions didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "I'm sorry," Brandon said. "I don't see anything under that name. Try Rupert Caldwell," Rupert said. "Or it may be under the holding company. Caldwell Development Group." Brandon typed again. Slower this time. His jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, this is the Lakeview Grand. Our standard rooms begin at $480 per night. Perhaps there's been a mix-up with another property?" There it was. Not the words themselves. The words were polite enough. It was the weight behind them. The assumption embedded inside the suggestion, like a splinter you can feel but can't quite see. "Perhaps there's been a mix-up. Perhaps you meant to walk into a different hotel. A cheaper one. One more suited to a man who looks like you." Rupert had heard that weight before. He'd been hearing it his whole life, actually, in different rooms, from different mouths, wearing different expressions. When he was 26 and walked into a bank in Hamilton, Ontario, trying to get a small business loan, and the loan officer kept glancing at the door like he expected someone more credible to walk through it. When he was 43 and showed up to close a deal on a commercial property in downtown Toronto, and the seller's agent had asked 3 times if his lawyer was on his way. When he was 60 and flew business class to Vancouver, and the man in the next seat asked if he was traveling for work. And when Rupert said yes, the man had nodded, slowly, carefully, the way people nod when they're deciding whether to believe you. 71 years old. And still this. He didn't say any of that. He just looked at Brandon steadily and said, "Try the Diamond Reserve Suite. That's what I booked." Brandon's fingers paused above the keyboard. The Diamond Reserve Suite was the hotel's flagship accommodation. 2 bedrooms, a private terrace overlooking Lake Ontario, a butler assigned exclusively to the suite for the duration of the stay. It ran $1,200 a night, and that was before the incidentals. Rupert knew this because he had chosen it specifically, not because he needed the space. He was traveling alone. But because the hotel was hosting the annual gala of the Canadian Construction and Development Alliance the following evening, and the suite came with 2 reserved seats at the head table. Rupert was being honored at that gala, the Lifetime Achievement Award. 43 years in commercial real estate development, 22 projects across 6 provinces, and a scholarship fund he'd quietly established 18 years ago that had now put over 300 young people through trades programs and engineering schools across the country. Brandon didn't know any of that, of course. What Brandon knew was what he could see. An old man with stiff hands and an old jacket and a suitcase with a broken zipper pull. "The Diamond Reserve Suite," Brandon repeated, his voice stripped down to something carefully neutral. "That suite requires a pre-authorized deposit of—" "Yes," Rupert said. "I know what it requires. I've been a member of this hotel's loyalty program for 11 years. Platinum tier. The deposit was handled when I made the booking." Brandon pulled up something else on his screen. His posture changed. Not a lot, just slightly. The way a person's posture changes when they've realized they may have miscalculated something but aren't quite ready to admit it. "I'll need to verify your identity," he said. Of course, Rupert said. He pulled out his driver's license, his passport, his platinum loyalty card. He laid all three on the counter the way a man lays down cards in a game he knows he's already won, calm and unhurried. Brandon examined each one. He checked the passport against the screen. He checked the loyalty card number. His face had gone through several quiet adjustments in the last 60 seconds. The initial condescension, the careful neutrality, and now something else, something he was working hard to keep from showing. "One moment," he said, and picked up the phone behind the desk. Rupert waited. He looked around the lobby while he waited. It was a beautiful space. He'd always thought so. High ceilings, warm stone floors, the kind of light fixtures that managed to feel grand without feeling cold. He'd actually attended a meeting in this hotel's boardroom back in 2009, when the ownership group was in the middle of a major renovation and needed outside consultation on structural decisions affecting the East Wing. He hadn't mentioned that to Brandon. He hadn't mentioned a lot of things. Behind him, the lobby was moving. A group of business people in identical lanyards crossed toward the elevators. A woman in a red coat waited near the concierge desk. Two bellhops pushed a cart stacked with luggage through a side corridor. None of them noticed Rupert standing at the front desk. That was the other thing about being 71. The invisibility. When you were young, people looked at you because you were young. When you had money, people looked at you because you had money, and money has a way of making itself visible through clothes and cars and posture. But when you were old and dressed plainly, when the money was real but quiet, sitting in accounts and holdings rather than hanging off your shoulders, people simply looked past you. Or worse, they looked at you and decided they already knew what they saw. Brandon was still on the phone. His voice was low, and Rupert caught fragments. "Says he has a reservation. Diamond Reserve. Loyalty card. Yes. I just want to confirm." There was a pause. And then Brandon's posture changed again, significantly this time, a shift that started at his shoulders and moved down through his whole body like a current. "I understand," he said into the phone. "Yes. Of course. I apologize." He hung up. He turned back to Rupert. Something had gone out of his face, the careful control, the professional surface. What replaced it was a younger expression, more uncertain, almost a little frightened. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, and this time the name landed differently. "I owe you an apology." "I?" "The suite," Rupert said. Not unkind, just clear. "Yes, of course. If I could just, and I'd like to know," Rupert said, "what exactly you thought you were doing." The lobby noise continued around them. The business people in lanyards, the woman in the red coat, the cart of luggage. None of it stopped. Brandon opened his mouth. "I wasn't," he started. "I didn't mean to imply." "What did you think?" Rupert said quietly. "When you looked at me and decided I had the wrong reservation." The question wasn't angry. That was the thing that seemed to unsettle Brandon most, the complete absence of anger in it. Just a genuine question from a man who had been asking a version of it his whole life and was still, somehow, curious about the answer. Brandon didn't have one. Not a real one. "I made an assumption," he said, finally. "And it was wrong." It was, Rupert agreed. What Brandon had learned from that phone call, and what Rupert still didn't know yet, standing at that marble counter, was what the woman on the other end of the line had told him. The call hadn't gone to a supervisor. Brandon had dialed the number for the hotel's general manager, a woman named Audrey, who had been managing the Lakeview Grand for 6 years, and who ran a tight professional operation. Audrey had picked up on the second ring. Brandon had explained the situation. A guest claiming the Diamond Reserve suite, older man. "The reservation is there. I just wanted to confirm." Audrey had said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Brandon, do you know who Caldwell Development Group is?" He didn't. "They're the investment partner on the new East Wing expansion," Audrey said. Her voice had been very even. "The one we've been negotiating for 2 years. The one that closes next month. Rupert Caldwell is not just a guest. He is, in a very direct sense, one of the reasons this hotel is about to add 42 rooms and a rooftop conference center." Brandon had said, "I understand." "Do you?" Audrey said. Because in about 45 seconds I'm going to walk through that lobby, and I need to see this handled. She wasn't exaggerating about the 45 seconds. Rupert was still standing at the counter when the door behind the front desk opened, and a woman in a charcoal blazer walked out and crossed the lobby floor with the direct, unhurried stride of someone entirely comfortable in the space she occupied. Audrey Sinclair was 53, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of handshake that immediately tells you this is a person who means what they say. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Audrey Sinclair, general manager. I'm sorry you were kept waiting." Rupert shook her hand. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he looked at people, and decided she was genuine. "Thank you," he said. "Your suite is ready. I'd like to walk you up personally, if that's acceptable. And I'd like to talk if you have a few minutes." "I have a few minutes," he said. They rode the elevator to the 14th floor. Audrey didn't fill the silence with apologies or explanations. She asked him how his flight from Calgary had been. She asked how the drive from the airport felt, whether the traffic on the Gardiner was as terrible as it always seemed to be. She asked these things the way a person asks them when they're actually interested in the answer, not killing time. Rupert found himself relaxing, slightly, the tightness that had been sitting across his shoulders since the front desk began to ease. "He's young," Rupert said, when they stepped out of the elevator, not excusing it, just noting it. "He is," Audrey said. "That doesn't make it acceptable." "No," Rupert agreed. "It doesn't." The suite was everything the description had promised. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The lake spread out below, gray-blue and enormous in the late afternoon light. A fruit basket on the table and a note from the kitchen asking if there were any dietary preferences for the stay. Rupert set his suitcase down by the door and stood at the window for a moment. He thought about his wife, Marguerite. She'd died 4 years ago. After 42 years of marriage, she would have loved this room. She would have gone immediately to the windows and pressed her hand against the glass, and said something quietly pleased and exact, the way she always did when something beautiful surprised her. She'd been like that, able to receive good things with a kind of clean, uncomplicated joy that Rupert had always admired, and never quite managed to replicate in himself. He thought about what she would have said about the front desk. She would have sighed, the short one. The one that meant not again, and then she would have gone to the window, and then they would have had dinner, and by morning it would have been something they stored away with all the other things, the accumulated weight of being seen wrong your whole life. But she wasn't here, and the suite was beautiful, and tomorrow night he was going to sit at a head table in the ballroom downstairs and receive an award for 43 years of building things that stood. He turned back to Audrey. "You said you wanted to talk," he said. She nodded. She sat down in one of the chairs by the window, not behind a desk, not standing formally, just sat like a person who was there to have an actual conversation. "I want you to know that what happened downstairs is not something I'll be ignoring," she said. "Brandon will go through additional training, and I'll be reviewing our front desk procedures more broadly. Not just for this property. We're part of a group of 4 hotels, and I've already sent a message to the other managers." Rupert sat down across from her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "What would have happened," he said, "if I weren't the investment partner? If I were just a man with a valid reservation and a platinum loyalty card, who'd saved up to bring his wife here for their anniversary?" Audrey was quiet for a moment. "That's the right question," she said. "And the honest answer is, I don't know, and that's the problem." Rupert nodded slowly. "I've been asking some version of that question since I was 26 years old," he said. "I asked it in a bank in Hamilton when a loan officer kept looking at the door. I asked it in a boardroom in Toronto, when a seller's agent wanted to know if my lawyer was on his way. I asked it at an airport in Vancouver, when the man beside me in business class couldn't decide if I was worth taking seriously." He paused. The answer was always the same. No one knows. And that's the problem. Audrey didn't try to fill the space with reassurances. She just stayed with it. Outside, the lake was going gold in the fading afternoon light. A container ship moved slowly across the far edge of the water, patient and enormous. My wife used to say, Rupert said, that the point isn't to make people feel ashamed after the fact. The point is to make them think before. She sounds like she was wise, Audrey said. She was the wisest person I knew, he said, by a considerable margin. The gala the following evening was exactly what those events always were. Round tables and centerpieces, and a program that ran 20 minutes long, speeches that went on past their natural endings. The warm institutional noise of several hundred people in a room who are glad to be there but also slightly tired. Rupert sat at the head table between the Alliance's executive director and a woman named Corinne Oduya, a structural engineer from Edmonton who was receiving the Young Innovator Award. Corinne was 34 years old and had designed a modular housing system that was being used in 3 northern communities. She was bright and funny and nervous in the specific way that people are nervous when they're about to stand in front of a room. And she reminded Rupert, in some quality he couldn't name precisely, of himself at that age. He talked to her through the appetizer and the main course. He told her that the nervousness didn't fully go away, but it changed. It became something you could use, fuel rather than friction. He told her about his first major project, a mixed-use development in Kitchener that had gone 3 months over schedule and $200,000 over budget, and how he'd stood in front of the ownership group to explain what had happened, and his hands had shaken the whole time. "Did it work out?" she asked. "Eventually," he said. "The building is still there. That's the thing about building. It either stands or it doesn't. All the other noise fades." Corinne laughed. "I'm going to remember that." When they called Rupert's name, when the executive director read out the citation, 43 years, 22 projects, 300 scholarship recipients, the room applauded with the full, genuine warmth of people who know the work and mean what they're doing with their hands. Rupert walked to the podium slowly. His knees were bothering him tonight, the left one especially, but he moved at his own pace and didn't hurry. He stood at the microphone and looked out at the room, the round tables, the centerpieces, the 400 faces turned toward him. He had planned a short speech, acknowledgments, a few thoughts on the industry, something about the next generation. He gave a different speech. He talked about being 26 years old in a bank in Hamilton. He talked about what it felt like to walk into rooms where people had already made up their minds about you before you opened your mouth. He talked about Marguerite and the way she pressed her hand against glass when something beautiful surprised her. He talked about the scholarship fund and why he'd started it, not because he'd had advantages, but because he hadn't, and he knew exactly what that cost. And then he said something that landed differently than he'd expected it to. He said, "The young man at the front desk downstairs did what people do all the time. He saw an old man in a worn jacket, and he made a calculation. That's human, but we have to decide, every day, whether we act on those calculations, or whether we stop, for 1 second, and ask ourselves what we actually know and what we're assuming. The cost of asking that question is almost nothing. The cost of not asking it, to the person on the other side, is very high." The room was very quiet. "I've been on the receiving end of that cost my whole life," he said, "and I'm standing here to tell you, it doesn't stop you, but it shouldn't have to be something you're stopped by in the first place." The applause that followed was not the polished, institutional kind. Brandon was in the lobby when Rupert came back down, late, after the gala had ended, and the last of the attendees had filtered toward the elevators. Brandon was finishing his shift. He was standing behind the desk, in the same way he'd been standing there the evening before, but something in his posture was different. He looked up when he saw Rupert crossing the lobby. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. Rupert stopped at the desk. "Mr. Caldwell," Brandon said again, and stopped. He seemed to be working something out. What to say, how to say it, whether words were even the right instrument for what he was trying to do. "I heard your speech," he said. "Audrey, the general manager, she set up a live stream in the break room." Rupert hadn't known that, I've been standing here thinking about it for the last 40 minutes. Brandon said, I don't think there's anything I can say that covers what I did, but I wanted you to know that I heard it, that I'm going to think about it. Rupert looked at him, the young man with the name tag, and the practiced smile that yesterday had meant welcome without meaning it. That's the whole thing, Rupert said. That's exactly it. He picked up his room key from the desk where he'd set it. Good night, Brandon. Good night, Mr. Caldwell. He went up to the suite. He stood at the window again. The same window, the lake now dark and scattered with city light reflections. He was tired in the particular way you get tired at 71 after a long day. Tired all the way through, the kind of tired that sleep genuinely fixes. He thought about the speech he hadn't planned to give. He thought about Corinne Oduya, who was probably in her room right now, still coming down from the nervous energy of standing at a podium for the first time. He thought about the 300 young people the scholarship fund had helped through school, the ones he never met. Most of them because the whole point was that it didn't need to be personal, it just needed to exist. He thought about Marguerite, pressing her hand against the glass. He pressed his own hand against the window. The glass was cool. Outside, the lake went on, enormous and patient, carrying the lights of the city on its surface, like something it had been trusted to hold. I've thought about this story a long time before writing it down, because here's what I want you to carry with you, wherever you're reading this from, whatever room you're in. The assumption costs almost nothing to make. A flicker of the eyes. A calculation that happens so fast you barely know you've made it. An old man in a worn jacket, a woman with the wrong luggage, a person who doesn't look the way you expect them to look, standing in the place you didn't expect to find them. That's all it takes, and it's done before you've even registered it. But the person on the other side of that assumption has been collecting them their whole life. Every room, every counter, every practiced smile that says welcome without meaning it. They carry every single one of those moments, and they carry them forward into every new room where someone else is already calculating. Rupert Caldwell built 22 buildings across this country. He put 300 kids through school. He sat at a head table and said, out loud, in front of 400 people, the thing that most people spend their whole lives deciding isn't worth saying. And the next morning, he checked out of the Lakeview Grand in the same worn jacket he'd arrived in, with the same suitcase with the broken zipper pull. He didn't need the window dressing. He never had.